Let me start with something that might piss you off. You're probably being psychologically manipulated right now by someone you trust. Maybe it's your girlfriend who makes you feel crazy whenever you bring up legitimate concerns. Maybe it's that business partner who somehow always comes out ahead while you're left holding the bag. Or perhaps it's that buddy who drains every ounce of energy from you while giving nothing back. Here's the kicker that would have blown Jung's mind. He never actually wrote a list of 6 dangerous people to avoid. This viral concept, circulating through the internet, is simultaneously completely false and profoundly true in a way that reveals something darker about human psychology than any simple list ever could. What Jung actually discovered through decades of working with broken minds and shattered psyches was far more disturbing. He identified unconscious psychological dynamics that turn ordinary people into psychological predators. These aren't cartoon villains twirling mustaches. They're your colleagues, your partners, your friends, sometimes even your family members. And according to recent research, 84% of women and 75% of men will fall into these invisible traps at least once, contributing to relationship damage that costs the US economy a staggering $3.6 trillion annually. Why should you, as a man navigating the treacherous waters of modern relationships, give a damn about this? Because traditional masculine socialization has created specific blind spots that these toxic dynamics exploit with surgical precision. The average American man encounters his first seriously toxic relationship pattern by age 24, yet most of us lack the psychological tools to recognize what's happening until significant damage has been done to our careers, our mental health, or our bank accounts. Carl Jung wasn't your typical academic psychologist sitting in an ivory tower theorizing about the human mind. This man descended into the depths of his own psyche, experienced what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, and emerged with insights that contemporary neuroscience is only now beginning to validate. His most profound warning remains as relevant today as it was a century ago. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Think about that for a moment. Every terrible relationship decision you've made, every toxic person you've attracted, every pattern that keeps repeating in your life despite your best intentions, Jung would argue these are not random accidents or bad luck. They're unconscious forces playing out like a predetermined script you never consciously agreed to perform. Through his clinical work, Jung identified 6 core unconscious dynamics that make people psychologically dangerous. These aren't simple personality types you can spot from across a room. They're deep archetypal patterns operating beneath the surface of consciousness, like psychological viruses that infect relationships and destroy mental health from within. The first dynamic is shadow projection, where someone projects their own repressed darkness onto you, making you the repository of everything they refuse to acknowledge about themselves. The second is archetypal possession, where unconscious forces like power complexes, victim mentalities, or hero complexes literally take over someone's personality. The third involves toxic anima and animus dynamics, the destructive masculine and feminine projections that create fatal attractions. The fourth encompasses pathological parent complexes, unresolved mother and father wounds that create repeating patterns in adult relationships. The fifth is ego inflation, a grandiose identification with archetypal power. And the sixth is psychological contagion, the spreading of unconscious toxicity from person to person like an emotional virus. Here's where it gets really interesting. Modern neuroscience is confirming what Jung intuitively understood 100 years ago. Brain imaging studies from 2024 show that narcissistic personalities have altered function in the prefrontal cortex and anterior insula, the exact brain regions responsible for self-awareness and empathy. Mirror neuron research proves that emotional contagion is real. Toxic emotions literally spread between brains like a communicable disease. Studies on stress responses demonstrate that toxic relationships trigger PTSD-like symptoms in 83.8% of victims. Jung said something that sounds simple, but cuts to the bone. A man who is possessed by his shadow is always standing in his own light and falling into his own traps. This describes the first dangerous type with frightening accuracy, the shadow projector. Let me paint you a picture from my own consulting work. I once worked with a 38-year-old tech executive named Marcus, who came to me because he was questioning his own sanity. His business partner had been systematically taking credit for Marcus's innovations, while simultaneously criticizing him for being unable to work collaboratively. When Marcus confronted him with documented evidence of his contributions, the partner didn't just deny it, he turned it around, suggesting Marcus was suffering from imposter syndrome and projecting his own inadequacies onto others. This is shadow projection, operating at its most insidious level. The partner couldn't acknowledge his own theft and mediocrity, so he projected those exact qualities onto Marcus with such conviction that Marcus began to doubt his own memories and perceptions. Friends noticed Marcus becoming defensive and paranoid. He found himself constantly justifying basic professional boundaries as reasonable requests. The neuroscience here is chilling. Studies show that narcissistic personality disorder affects 7.7% of men and 4.8% of women, with measurably altered brain function in areas controlling self-awareness. These individuals literally cannot see their own flaws. They can only see them in you. For men specifically, shadow projectors target your competence and professional abilities because that's where most of us derive our sense of identity and worth. They make you defend your basic needs as if they're unreasonable demands. Your friends notice personality changes when you're around them. Most dangerously, you start doubting your own memories and perceptions through a process psychologists call gaslighting. The real-world example that most American men will recognize: the colleague who steals your ideas in meetings while simultaneously complaining to management that you're not a team player when you object. Or the girlfriend who cheats and then convinces you that your reasonable concern about her behavior is actually your jealousy problem that you need to work on. Jung warned us, when an archetype is unconsciously constellated and not consciously understood, one is possessed by it and forced to its fatal goal. This is the psychological mechanism behind the second dangerous type, the person possessed by archetypal power. Think of archetypes not as mere behavioral patterns, but as ancient universal psychic energies existing in humanity's collective unconscious. The king, the sage, the hero, the victim, these are massive psychological forces that can inspire greatness or cause destruction, depending on whether they're consciously integrated or operating from the shadows. The person possessed by the power archetype believes they possess special knowledge or authority that others lack. They weaponize spiritual, intellectual, or professional superiority. They cannot tolerate being wrong or challenged. They create cult-like dynamics in relationships and groups. I've seen this play out in Silicon Valley more times than I can count. The startup founder who micromanages every detail because only I understand the vision. The wellness guru who controls her partner's diet, social connections, and daily schedule for his optimal growth. The therapist who uses his position to create dependency rather than facilitate independence. Brain scans reveal enlarged striatum and abnormal connectivity in individuals with grandiose narcissistic traits, affecting reality testing and social judgment. Translation: these people literally cannot see reality as it is. They see it through the distorting lens of their own grandiosity. Warning signs for men. They speak about others with contempt or pity, always positioning themselves as superior. Rules apply to everyone except them. They systematically isolate you from other perspectives or advice. Most insidiously, you feel like a child around them, not an equal adult, a psychological regression triggered by the archetypal power they wield. Jung observed something crucial about male-female dynamics. Both alike have bad taste. The anima surrounds herself with inferior people, and the animus lets himself be taken in by second-rate thinking. This is the key to understanding the third dangerous type, the anima manipulator. Here's what most men don't understand about their own psychology. Inside every man exists an anima, an inner feminine image representing all the emotional, intuitive, and relational qualities that traditional masculinity trains you to suppress. It carries the potential for deep emotional connection, but also for irrational behavior and emotional dependency. When you meet a woman who embodies your anima projection, the attraction can be magnetic and terrifying. Initially, she seems perfect, understanding your emotional needs like no one else. Gradually, she becomes moody, unpredictable, emotionally manipulative. You lose access to logic and critical thinking around her. This is the psychological trap operating at full force. Consider this. Your entire life, you've been trained not to be emotional, unpredictable, irrational. Everything associated with femininity has been labeled unacceptable for you as a man. But deep inside, all these qualities exist, repressed, unintegrated, living in your shadow. When you meet someone who embodies these qualities, something incredible happens. You become simultaneously fascinated and addicted to their emotional intensity. The anima manipulator understands this instinctively. She alternates between accepting your dark side and punishing you for it. You feel both protective and helpless simultaneously. Modern research on borderline personality disorder shows disrupted brain circuits in emotion regulation areas, creating the intense highs and lows that trap partners in trauma bonding. Real example from my practice. Jake, a 32-year-old lawyer, met a woman who initially seemed amazed by his sensitivity and vulnerability. 6 months later, she was using those same qualities to shame and control him during arguments, calling him weak and not a real man when he expressed emotional needs, while simultaneously demanding he open up more. The complex carrier. When they know exactly which buttons to push. Jung recognized that toxic parent complexes create invisible chains in adult relationships. This brings us to the fourth dangerous type, the complex carrier who triggers your deepest wounds with uncanny precision. For men, the mother complex exploitation works like this. She triggers your need to rescue and protect. She alternates between helpless victim and controlling authority. She uses guilt, shame, and emotional manipulation as primary tools. She makes you feel responsible for her emotional well-being. Statistics reveal that 22% of American adults report ongoing psychological effects from childhood family dysfunction, creating predictable vulnerabilities in adult relationships. If you grew up with an emotionally unstable, controlling, or absent mother, you carry this complex like an invisible template, attracting similar patterns. The father complex exploitation operates differently. He attacks your competence and authority. He creates competitive dynamics to maintain dominance. He alternates between harsh criticism and impossible to earn approval. He undermines your relationships with other men and authority figures. If your father was critical, absent, or abusive, this pattern is imprinted in your psyche. The complex carrier knows exactly which buttons to push, often faster than you realize you have those buttons. They possess an almost supernatural ability to make you feel inadequate, to seek their approval, to compete for validation of your worth. I worked with a 41-year-old entrepreneur named David, whose investor had somehow recreated his relationship with his critical father. No matter how successful the company became, the investor always found something wrong, always withheld full approval, always dangled the promise of recognition just out of reach. David found himself working 18-hour days, trying to earn validation that would never come, reenacting his childhood pattern of seeking his father's approval. Jung cautioned, it causes exaggeration, a puffed-up attitude, loss of free will, delusion, and enthusiasm in good and evil alike. This perfectly describes the fifth dangerous type, the inflation carrier who feeds your ego to control you. The hook works like this. They make you feel special, chosen, superior to others. They feed your ambitions and dreams while subtly creating dependency. They isolate you by making you feel above ordinary people and problems. They use your achievements and status as extensions of their own identity. For men, this targets your drive for success and recognition, turning it into a control mechanism. Modern psychology identifies these as grandiose narcissistic supply relationships, where one person feeds off another's achievements while gradually undermining their independence. The warning signs are subtle but critical. You feel uncomfortable when they praise you to others. Something doesn't ring true. They take partial credit for your accomplishments in ways that are hard to pin down. Friends tell you that you've become arrogant or distant. Most dangerously, your self-worth becomes dependent on their approval. A client of mine, a 45-year-old hedge fund manager named Robert, had a girlfriend who constantly talked about our success when discussing his career. She introduced him to everyone as my genius boyfriend, while simultaneously making financial decisions that benefited her, subtly taking over his social calendar and isolating him from friends who questioned the relationship. When Robert achieved a major career milestone, instead of celebrating him, she made it about how she had supported and inspired him to reach this point. Jung's framework on psychological contagion and energy transfer brings us to the sixth dangerous type, the psychological vampire who feeds on your life force. The energy drainage patterns are remarkably consistent. You feel exhausted after spending time with them, even during seemingly pleasant interactions. They create constant crises requiring your attention and resources. Conversations always become about their problems, needs, and drama. You find yourself giving more and more while receiving less and less. Research shows that codependent patterns affect 40 to 60% of people who grew up in dysfunctional families, creating predictable vulnerability to energy vampires. If you were raised in an environment where you had to manage your parents' emotional needs, this pattern is deeply imprinted. Neuroscience reveals something startling. Chronic stress from these relationships spikes cortisol levels, creating symptoms that mimic PTSD, including insomnia, poor concentration, and emotional dysregulation. This isn't just feeling drained, it's measurable biological damage. The male-specific version targets your provider instincts and hero complex, making you feel needed while slowly extracting your resources and energy. The woman who always has some crisis only you can solve. The friend perpetually in financial trouble who needs your help. The colleague who always has emotional drama, requiring your time and attention. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Traditional masculinity creates specific blind spots that make men particularly vulnerable to these toxic dynamics. This isn't men's fault. It's the result of centuries of social programming that's now backfiring in the modern relationship landscape. The emotional suppression trap is the first major vulnerability. Boys taught that emotions equal weakness become adults who cannot recognize emotional manipulation. Research shows men are 3 times more likely to miss early warning signs of psychological abuse because they've been trained to suppress emotional intelligence. The independence paradox is equally dangerous. The same self-reliance that makes men successful also makes them vulnerable to partners who exploit their need to handle everything alone. Statistical reality is stark. 48.8% of men experience psychological aggression from intimate partners, but only 1 in 10 men seek help, compared to 1 in 4 women. The father wound creates specific vulnerabilities. With 24% of American children living in father-absent homes, patterns emerge. Difficulty distinguishing healthy from unhealthy authority, desperate need for male approval and validation, attraction to partners who replicate the father's emotional unavailability. A critical father complex creates perfectionism and self-doubt that toxic partners exploit through conditional acceptance and constant criticism. The absent mother wound makes men vulnerable to partners who promise unconditional love, while actually providing emotional withholding. Now that you understand the psychology of danger, let's get practical. I've developed the shadow method for detecting toxic people based on Jungian principles. S stands for split reality. Do you feel different around them versus with healthy people? Healthy relationships make you more authentic. Toxic ones fragment you. H is history check. Do they have a pattern of destroyed relationships? One failed marriage means nothing. Multiple wrecked relationships where they're always the victim is a red flag the size of Texas. A means accountability. Do they take responsibility or always blame others? Healthy people can say, I screwed up. Toxic people always have excuses. D represents dependency. Are they creating financial, emotional, or social dependency? Healthy relationships encourage independence. Toxic ones systematically increase your dependence. O is overwhelm. Do you feel emotionally flooded or confused around them? Toxic people create chronic emotional overwhelm that makes clear thinking impossible. W stands for warning signs. Are friends and family expressing concern? Your loved ones see changes you might not recognize. If multiple people in your life are worried, that's a sign you cannot ignore. Beyond detection, you need active protection. Develop your thinking function by analyzing behavior patterns, not just words. Watch what they do, not what they say. Trust your authentic emotions through the feeling function, not the ones they're trying to induce. Ground yourself in physical reality through the sensation function. Your body knows before your mind does. And cultivate your intuition function, that inner voice speaking below conscious thought. The ultimate goal isn't just avoiding toxic people. It's building such a strong psychological foundation that they cannot harm you even if you encounter them. Start with shadow work. What behaviors in others create your strongest emotional reactions? These often reveal your own shadow projections and vulnerabilities. Learn to recognize emotions beyond anger. Most men convert all feelings into rage. Practice naming feelings without judgment. I feel hurt is more accurate than I'm pissed. Build authentic male friendships that go beyond surface activities. Create reciprocal support systems with other men. Practice conflict resolution without abandoning friendship. Men need other men, not just for sports and beers, but for emotional truth and mutual support. Seek professional help from therapists who understand masculine psychology. Participate in men's groups for ongoing development. Use coaching relationships for practical skill building. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The recovery statistics offer hope. 83% success rate for men who engage in appropriate therapeutic work. 50% reduction in future toxic relationships for those who complete shadow work. 4-to-1 return on investment in mental health treatment for improved life outcomes. Jung's promise remains as powerful today as when he first articulated it. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks inside awakens. It's time to wake up. Time to reclaim your power from the unconscious dynamics that have been running your life. Time to become master of your own psyche instead of slave to invisible forces. The toxic people will always exist. But with this knowledge, this consciousness, this integrated masculinity, they can no longer control you. You will see them for what they are. You will recognize the patterns, and you will have the power to choose a different path. This is the freedom Jung promises us, the freedom to live consciously, authentically, wholly, the freedom to awaken. Start today. Identify one relationship in your life that drains your energy or makes you question your sanity. Use these tools to understand the unconscious dynamics at play. Your future self will thank you for the courage to look inside, to integrate your shadow, to become truly conscious. Because in the end, the most dangerous person in your life might not be someone else. It might be the unconscious version of yourself that keeps choosing the same toxic patterns, and the only way to defeat that enemy is to bring it into the light of consciousness. Wake up. The unconscious has controlled you long enough.